Chicago Bears are in an enviable position. Winning the Tank Bowl has its benefits, and a quarterback-hungry team like Carolina is going to open the draft pick vault and pay up for the honor of drafting first overall. To move up 8 positions, they gave up 2 firsts, 2 seconds, and a quality player in DJ Moore. It's a trade that can't be properly assessed for years, but many believe that the Bears outright fleeced the Panthers in the initial reaction. The hope for both teams is that they both succeed and don't end up as a cautionary tale. We can look right to the Minnesota Vikings for that one. Many said that they fleeced the Dallas Cowboys in trading for Herschel Walker at the time the deal was made. It'd be a shame if it ended up blowing up on them. But before we begin with the dissection, let's talk about the sponsor of this video, Aura. An important focus of mine on the internet realm is data protection and privacy. I know of too many people who have had data breaches or lost significant sums of money due to being caught up in scams or identity fraud. Even with allegedly trusted sources, you can't be too careful with your information. And Aura seeks to aid you in this endeavor. They're an all-in-one app. A VPN, antivirus software, parental controls, password manager, and online security. Aura actively scans the dark web as well as other sites to ensure that your data and information isn't ripe for the taking. I've been using it for a while now, and even still, Aura found 3 more instances of my information available on the web in the past month. Look at how many data brokers have had access to it before Aura. You don't even need to be doing anything wrong, it'll happen regardless. Fortunately, Aura also protects the wallet, since you don't have to pay for 7 different apps at a time. And you don't even need to pay to start. Simply try it for free for 2 weeks by going to aura.com/utree. I wouldn't be mentioning this if I didn't believe in the power of information protection. And with Aura, they keep me protected in at least a few aspects of it. Now back to the video. At the beginning of 1989, the Dallas Cowboys were in a state of chaos and transition. The old guard had withered away into a hollow husk of its former self. The great stars of the 70s were either gone or getting long in the tooth. This franchise's corpse had gotten bloated, rotting, and pungent from years of decay. The star had faded into an irrelevant entity past its time. And worst of all, it was bleeding financially. Some say to the tune of millions per year. It's here where a great change was made in ownership. In February, a rather striking, well-dressed oilman from Arkansas named Jerry Jones bought them off Bum Bright for an incredible $140 million. After the deal was official, he walks in and sees a corpulent entity that's grown complacent and apathetic. Even God didn't want to watch this shit on Sunday. There was only one option. A purge that would make Stalin wince. Tom Landry, Tex Schramm, and Gil Brandt. Great football men, but relics of the 70s. Landry was a legend, but well past his expiration date. He didn't get the hint, so Joey Boy fucked him with his fedora as a condom. He proceeded with bullying Schramm and Brandt out of the building, and brought in his old college football teammate as his new head coach. Jimmy Johnson was excellent at Miami, but he had a big challenge ahead of him. Dallas went 3-13 in 1988, and next to nothing was in the pipeline. Only Herschel Walker, some solid pieces on defense, and a couple of good young players like Ken Norton Jr. and Michael Irvin, but the rest? The less said, the better. The 1989 draft did bring them some solid pieces, but the team was terrible. Starting the season 0-5 while giving up just under 30 points a game. Watching as Troy Aikman died in the pocket with a running game going nowhere was an agonizing sight. And to add more salt to the wound, Dallas not only drafted Aikman first overall in 1989, they selected another quarterback in Steve Walsh first overall in the 1989 supplemental draft. That meant Dallas didn't have a first-round pick in 1990. Even with Herschel Walker, they were useless. Jimmy Johnson knew it. I should talk a bit about Herschel Walker, shouldn't I? He was only one of the greatest running backs in college football history. Then he went to the USFL and destroyed worlds over there, only to don the star and become the focal point of the offense. Their leading rusher and pass catcher for 2 consecutive years. Rumbling for 1,500 rushing yards and 2,000 total yards in 1988. The problem? He couldn't play every position. Dallas knew they needed to wipe it clean and undergo a full-scale rebuild. Walker would be past his prime by the time they were ready to compete. Not to mention, Herschel didn't fit the scheme Jimmy Johnson wanted to run. Who else was available to trade? Michael Irvin? Then who would catch passes from Aikman or Walsh? Jim Jeffcoat or Ken Norton? Solid, but not going to fetch a ton on the market. The only option to refresh the talent pool was to trade Herschel. But there'd be serious blowback. They'd be unable to run an offense, people would cry. They weren't winning with Walker. Plus, he was only averaging 3 yards per carry behind this offensive line. So the feelers started going out. And after a few days, a deal is struck. with the Cleveland Browns. Didn't expect that twist, did you? The original deal was to send Walker there for 2 firsts, 3 seconds, and a position player. However, Jimmy and Jerry felt they could get more. They made some cold calls. And this is the part where Minnesota comes into the story. The Vikings felt they were on the cusp of greatness. They had reached the conference championship in 1987 only to lose to the Redskins on the final play. In 1988, they had run into a 49er dynasty. A strong team with an excellent defense, but had a gaping hole in their team design. They had no running game. As an old-school smash-mouth offense that tends to go poorly. Minnesota didn't have a bell cow running back. Only a committee of men who hadn't mustered a game of more than 80 yards rushing since 1987. Darren Nelson could be called their headliner, but was more known for dropping a pass in the championship game than anything on the field as of late. DJ Dozier had been drafted in the first round, but he was quickly being revealed as a flop. They had tried for years to fix it, to no success. And bigger risks had to be taken. Now imagine if you get a call saying Herschel Walker is available for the taking. With him as your running back, with that defense, with a Pro Bowl quarterback in Wade Wilson, you can beat San Francisco. The heights of Lombardi are within reach. The price and stipulations of the deal would be exorbitant. As one GM put it, an agreement longer than the Magna Carta. However, when you go all in, the risk is irrelevant. Only one thing stood in the way. Herschel Walker. He refused to go to Minnesota at first. Even if he didn't have a no-trade clause, his holdout would destroy the deal. It took a week of persuasion to get him to warm up to a move. And that only happened due to a few perks thrown his way. $1.25 million payment, a house of equal size to the one he had in Dallas, and the Mercedes-Benz of his choice. It was now official. Herschel Walker for 5 players. Darren Nelson, Jesse Solomon, David Howard, Isaac Holt, and Alex Stewart. A first-round draft pick and 6 conditional picks. All tied to whether or not the players acquired play for the Cowboys. Jimmy Johnson immediately called it the great train robbery after the fact, but on the surface it looked terrible for Dallas. And it was shredded by the public when announced. Eric Dickerson got traded for 3 firsts, 3 seconds, and 2 players a few years ago, and this was all they could do? None of these players were starters on Minnesota in 1989. Jesse Solomon was coming off knee surgery. Alex Stewart was on IR. Darren Nelson threatened to retire instead of report to Dallas. So they oblige him and trade him to San Diego for a 5th-round pick flipped to Minnesota. The Cowboys got an extra 2nd and 6th-round pick to play with as a result of trading Nelson from the Walker deal. There's the hidden motive. Dallas was never interested in the players. They wanted the draft picks. The idea was the more picks secured, the better chances of drafting quality players. So better chance to strike oil with more plots of land to dig in. Alex Stewart was cut a month later by Dallas, so had a 3rd-rounder gained. Jimmy nearly cut the other 3, but then decided it'd just be easier if they played and avoided more embarrassment on the field. Send a few 3rd-round picks and some extra change to Minnesota to undo the stipulations. There you have the trade of trades. We know the rest of the story from here. After finishing 1-15 in 1989, Dallas uses the draft picks acquired, mainly in a barrage of frequent and shrewd trading to select players that would go on to become key contributors to the Cowboys dynasty. Merely 3 years after being mocked for trading away the face of the franchise, Dallas reasserted itself as a cultural dynamo and sent Jerry Jones's ego into absolute overdrive. A happy ending indeed. The Herschel Walker trade wasn't the be-all and end-all. It was merely the seed planted and was scouted and developed to perfection. This kind of video has been done to absolute death, I know, but think of it like this. Nobody discusses this trade as absolutely lopsided if the Vikings win a Super Bowl with Herschel. A ring is the ultimate antidote. And in his first game against Green Bay, his electric performance got them more rushing yards in 1/2 than the Vikings had in any game all season. Herschel Mania was born, and then died quickly thereafter. He had several strong performances after the fact, but it became very apparent that Herschel Walker wasn't the missing piece Minnesota needed to go on a deep run. They had significantly more issues hampering them, mainly an inconsistent quarterback play, allowing defenses to zone in on the run. Not to mention, Walker was quickly put in the same running back committee that Minnesota had been running before he got there. They rarely used him as a bell cow. After Week 9 in 1989, Herschel only had 1 game of over 50 yards rushing. Defense was carrying Minnesota to relevance, and they barely scraped past Green Bay to win their division that year. There was a common foe that was waiting for them after, however. San Francisco. They were destroyed at Candlestick Park in the playoffs. Their prize acquisition Herschel gained 29 yards on 9 rushing attempts. Some chase of Lombardi, lads. It would only get worse from there. Thanks to severe injuries and a defense that was no longer otherworldly, Minnesota went from Super Bowl aspirations to an afterthought. Sentenced to hell by starting 1990 1-6, and then losing their final 4 games. 1991 brought about a pedestrian 8-8, sealing this trade's fate. Mike Lynn, the GM behind the disastrous trade, jumped ship to run the World League of Football in 1990. He ran it for a year before he jumped ship there as well. Even if it wasn't really his fault, Herschel became the punching bag for Vikings failure. He'd lose his incredible reputation, criticized at every turn. He'd be benched in games a year after the trade. He'd be accused of losing his heart for the game. He wouldn't have a 100-yard rushing performance at all in 1990. He'd eventually be relegated to platooning with Terry Allen in 1991. Herschel and Minnesota were as potent together as bleach and ammonia. It became toxic. Walker was gone after that season, and would have a revival in Philadelphia, but he would never return to the greatness he showed in the 1980s. Ironically, he'd end his career as a Cowboy, playing with them in 1996 and 1997. It wasn't all terrible for the Vikings in this trade, though. They did get Jake Reed out of it. He was a solid receiver in Minnesota for a while. Yeah, it doesn't make up for the haul they lost. Thus ends the story of the trade. A team giving up their short-term future for a piece that wasn't anywhere near as advertised. Can't imagine anyone doing that in the modern NFL.
We get down there, and it was a dumb play by Anderson. I love Anderson. But it was a dumb fucking play when his foot was, shoe was coming off, up the line of scrimmage. We were howling take time out. We had a fucking trap play called, and his fucking shoe comes off. That ain't Bob Schnelker's fault. We have another fucking trap play, and if Finney picks up his fucking feet, he walks in. We got the fucking pass to AC out there in the flat. The ball's thrown in low. That isn't Schnelker's fault.